Welcome to Nomadic Diaries, a podcast revealing secrets of life lived overseas. We use storytelling to deliver insight and information on what it takes to live, love, move, and travel across the globe. Our guests are professionals from the world of global mobility. We hope that by opening their diaries to share their wisdom, that you, our listener, can benefit and enjoy more ease and grace in your expat life abroad. Hi, everybody, and welcome to Nomadic Diaries. My name is Doreen Cumberford, and good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, wherever you are. I would like you to meet my show co-host, Sharon Fields.
Thank you, Doreen. It's great to be here and with our special guest today, Nick Dunn.
So Nick helps diverse teams thrive by building intercultural competence and cohesion. He began his intercultural career as a Peace Corps volunteer in Western China, and at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, he not only advised international students, but he assessed, trained, and coached intercultural skills for thousands of faculty, staff, and student leaders, because we all need it. Using the Intercultural Development Inventory, Nick uses research-backed, field-tested methods to assess and train the skills that bridge from diversity to inclusion. He serves as the community curator for the Interchange Institute and is often spotted riding bikes with his amazing wife and 3 brilliant kids. Nick, we are so happy to have you here today on Nomadic Diaries. Thank you for joining us and being willing to spend a little time on our young podcast at this point.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Doreen, Sharon. Let's do this. Let's talk culture.
Yeah, let's talk culture. So tell us a little bit about your day-to-day life and who do you mostly train in intercultural principles?
Yeah, day-to-day is a funny one. I'll give you 3 days. 3 days, day to day today. Last week, Thursday, we'll start with that day, up at 6 a.m. out in LA, going out to a large construction company, meeting with about 15 people in their leadership to train inclusion and inclusion mindset, inclusion practices, practicing some of the skills through conversations, dialogues, case studies, just doing a little teaching, doing a little train the trainer with a co-facilitator from the company. So that's one thing a day might look like, just 4.5 hours in a training room, going deep and learning together, growing together. Another day might look like Saturday to Sunday. I include that as one day because we were up until after 1:30 in the morning at a student leadership retreat. So sometimes this work looks like just facilitating small group sessions and helping student leaders unpack the leadership lessons they're learning from a challenge course out in the woods, when we're all pushing each other up the wall, or, in our role plays, or even the global talent show of all things. Today looked like getting my son picked up from the dentist because there was a tough scheduling handoff with my faculty member wife, because real life gets in the way of consulting, or is it vice versa? Consulting gets in the way of real life sometimes.
I think that's the way it works.
Some people talk about work-life balance. I like Patrick Lencioni's concept of work-life integration.
Yeah.
So it's all of a piece. And then a couple of sessions with individuals, with a corporation who are going through an inclusion journey, an educational journey. We're doing some of the pre-work, some of the self-work of understanding how they encounter difference. What kinds of differences do they encounter? How do they navigate those? How have they developed their approach to dealing with difference using the IDI? So sometimes it's small groups, sometimes it's in person, sometimes it's Zoom. So I'm glad you said day to day instead of day in the life. I don't know what a day would look like.
Well, this gives a much clearer picture. Thank you.
So tell us about your core messages and that you're sharing and that you're teaching and helping others. You say your core messages are listen, learn, and love. Tell us
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I start with the goal of love. Different kinds of love. There's the way I love pizza. There's the way I love my wife. There's the way I love my friends, my community. There's the way I love friends and colleagues. The core thing that goes across all of that is that I want the best for all those people. Maybe not pizza. I want to consume it and use it for my pleasure. But when we say love in our language and English, and we really mean I want the best for you. And I think you want the best for other people too. As a message I would give to people, how do we get there? What are the impediments to that? A lot of times we're going to assume that people want what we want. They see the world the way we see it. We're basically the same. Hey, that's true in a lot of ways. But when it's not, oh, it's really not. It's just super not. So how do we listen to really learn where another person is coming from, who that other person is, what's their story, so that we can then love them? That is to say, help them flourish and be the best they can be.
Mm-hmm.
For me, a lot of that has to do with culture. And so
Mm-hmm.
I want to teach people. I do teach people to listen. I do teach people to learn from one another and about one another. Again, ultimately for the purpose of love.
I love that. It seems very natural and organic in a way. And
Yeah,
isn't that
it's
how
not a
it works?
program.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's natural. It's organic. I think it's what people want to do. I
Mm-hmm.
work with people of goodwill. I work with people in good faith. They're everywhere around us all the time, surrounded by people who want to love and do well by others. I'm just coming alongside them to help them think through some of the best ways to do that.
That's a great way to put it. I love that. Yesterday, I had a little conversation with a couple. He's Argentinian, she's Japanese, and they're both consultants, business consultants, and she's a translator actually from Spanish to Japanese and back again. Well, we had a conversation in English, and I was thinking, I really love this couple. They're quite young. Well, they're much younger than us, but we get along great. And I was just thinking about how much I love spending time with them.
Mm.
And like you said, sometimes I'm thinking, what are they thinking? Because I'm pretty sure what I said wasn't what they got.
Mm. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's funny. Listening is on both sides, of course. If there's a conversation, there's at least two voices. And so then or points of view or messages being shared, however it's being shared, voice or otherwise. But yeah, are they picking up what you're putting out? Is a really great question. One of the leading indicators that we're engaging in cross-cultural learning or intercultural cohesion is that we are listening and asking, are they understanding what I meant? Am I
Yes.
understanding what they meant?
Mm-hmm.
But it's in the context, Doreen. I love this of enjoyment.
Right.
You're
Right.
learning them. They're
Yeah.
learning you. That's a beautiful thing.
And what I would say is Sharon and I are both third chapter individuals, let's say, living in a third culture or another culture for both of us.
Yeah.
And both of us are in intercultural relationships, partnerships, and so much opportunity for misunderstandings.
Let me tell you a little story of how my yesterday went. I was with a very dear friend who is from Australia. And then we had invited some friends over to play cards with us who are from the southern part of the US. And then my partner came and joined us, and he's from Mexico. And so we had a big discussion about the cultural, representation right there at the table, and how I spent most of my years in Texas. And so the southern U.S. was represented, and we were having a conversation that the Australian didn't comprehend why we were saying certain things, and she didn't understand that it was all with love. when you say bless her heart or, any of that, they didn't understand that it was all with jest and with love. And so just in that one little instance, how much was being absorbed and not absorbed, it was very interesting.
And I do believe that in today's very fast-paced world, do you find this, Nick, is that we have these cultural blips that come in, but we don't necessarily have the time, the process, or the bandwidth to handle it. So can you give us maybe some tips for our listeners who are here today listening to this conversation, who may be really interested in expanding their cultural complexity and agility?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take all three of those things because I hear those all the time: time, bandwidth, and process. I reorder them a little bit, but time, bandwidth, and process. Number one, time. I know it. I often joke with clients that once we can get a 28-hour day, an 8-day week, in place, then we're going to be fine. We'll fill it in with that. But we know that's not even true. Life will fill in. And so one thing I would say is, can we change how we're spending the time we're already spending with people? Someone I really respect in this field is Mary Frances Winters. She talks about empathy being informed by exposure, experience, and education across difference. And so if we're having exposure with difference and we push that deeper, I know people who have the same, 10-word conversation with me on an almost daily basis at the coffee shop, for instance. Colleagues where we have the same conversation about football or whatever, even family, but it's a script. Those have a place. It's not to say that small talk doesn't have a place, but could we go deeper? Could we intentionally, and even just have the conversation, say, hey, look, I want us to know more about each other. So I'll probably be asking you some questions. Ask me some questions. Let's share. And go deeper. So get intentional about how we're using our time. You probably are already in contact with your best teachers. There are people around you who would love to learn more about you. It just takes one of you to start it. And so if you're listening, this is your permission. Tell them Nick sent you. It's okay. You can take the first step. Initiate.
Yeah.
So the second thing is bandwidth. And I think that just bandwidth comes with practice. There are things that a guitarist does. Now, I don't play guitar, but I'm endlessly fascinated by guitarists that can speak naturally while playing guitar. Guitarists that can sing while playing. And now a musician is going to say, well, that's easy. We've spent the time. We've trained our hand and our voice to do different things, complementary but separate things. And I would just say, yeah, bandwidth. We can train our mind to be looking both at the conversation, at the person, but also the meta level, the meta conversation. What are the little phrases that someone's using? Little meta phrases like "bless her heart," or Sharon. Another one I love is "but I love her," or "I love you, but I love you, but you got to do something about her," or "I love you, but don't bring that casserole again."
That's right.
So marking those things down in our minds, we can train ourselves to do that, to have that little meta conversation and notice how we're talking. I think some of that is mindfulness practice, perhaps mindfulness, meditation, journaling after the fact, and then kind of bringing some of that awareness into encounters. Now, once you've practiced it outside of cross-cultural encounters. Now, a process. That is the big one, and that's a lot of folks just get overwhelmed. It's drinking from a fire hose, if you will. It's trying to drain the Atlantic Ocean one spoonful at a time. How are we going to know everything about the history, the philosophy, the anthropology, the sociology of every country, culture, linguistic group, gender, sexuality, like everything? Good luck. Where do you begin? Something I love is Franz Trampenaar's approach to this. He's not alone, but he's where I started with this work. Gerrit Hofstede does something like this. Aaron Meyer in the Culture Map does something like this. But Trampenaar's is where I got it at first. Cut across all the culture-specific stuff that we had talked about, history, sociology, etc. Putting across all that, just ask, what is culture fundamentally? Culture in one way is how a group of people solve fundamental human problems, Like, how do I express displeasure or dissatisfaction? I might, and it is a desire for something to change. I might say, oh, or for the listeners, sorry, I just shivered and rubbed my shoulders a little bit, hugged myself.
Thanks for
Now,
the visuals.
yeah, and in an indirect communication culture, someone will notice that. They've been trained to notice that. They know how to interpret that. They'll supply the message, Nick is cold. I should raise the temperature. In a direct communication culture, someone will just say, hey, I'm cold. Please turn up the temperature. Really straightforward.
Yeah.
And Trompenaars, what he says is that's a cultural dilemma.
Yes.
We've got this way to address that problem. We have that way to address that problem. And so what we mean by culture is the collections of local solutions to those problems. What happens in a multicultural setting? Well, now you have some people shivering to send a message, other people just very directly making claims on other people's time and actions through directness. And boy, if you've ever seen that mix, I mean, cats and dogs look like just good old friends compared to what that meeting room looks like when we're trying to decide a new strategic direction or how to spend a budget or where to put our time and priority. The indirectness and the directness just unfortunately miss each other at best. And it can be a festering wound and conflict, at worst. What do you do about that? So first we identify that there are differences. We have our radar on, that meta cognition to look for the differences. And then 4 R's. Trompenaars suggests 4 R's. And the first R, recognize the differences. Whiteboard, or even better, a Google document or a piece of paper, something that's going to be static and persistent. What are the differences in your way of approaching it or mine? Now, I could say the Japanese way versus the Brazilian way, the Mexican way versus the Australian way. Do that. Or I could just say directness or indirectness, however it shows up. Well, how do you approach it? How do I approach it? Let's look at the differences. Respect the differences. Respect, like from the Latin, look again. Look again at the recognition list and then actually respect them. Talk about the strengths. What are the underlying values that are being expressed and received through that style? Maybe directness is valuing precision and efficiency. Maybe indirectness is valuing relationship and care and face. Hey, that's all true. That's all good. Let's make that respect list, make that into a spec list, the specifications for what our solution is going to be. We want to hit all those values. What?
So let's just say that again. So you're saying make the respect list into a spec list, as if it's
that
a
wordplay.
list.
That wordplay looks better in text.
As if it looks but I just wanted to underline it because it's very clever. Because if we have a spec list of those differences, then we can be very clear, or we can become clearer in the communication, right?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so these are the values we want to have. We want efficiency and clarity and precision and respect and face and cohesion.
Yeah.
And then now that we've talked about the strengths of each approach, the third R, reconcile the differences into a new third way, our way of solving this problem. We need to communicate about a problem, a conflict, upset, negative feedback, all the hard things of life and work relationships. We're going to have to keep doing it. So let's agree together, let's build together a way to do that harnesses the best of directness and indirectness. And then number 4, realize the difference. Actually put it into practice and iterate and reiterate the new process. Continuing to reform it and grow it.
That's great. So that's a lot to take in for listeners.
Yeah, that's a lot. Normally that's several hours.
Yes, several hours. This is a 4.5 hour workshop delivered over the course of about 29 minutes today. Well, this is the way we collapse time. I just, when you were talking about this, I was thinking about reconcile the differences.
Yeah.
Since I'm still learning Spanish, the way I reconcile the difference between English and Spanish, I've come up with my own version of communications called Franglish, because I learned French before I learned I learned English, then I learned French when I was quite young. And at one time I was fluent in it. And what I've discovered is that people in Mexico are very forgiving. Not all cultures I have lived in have been this forgiving of language, but reconciling the difference sometimes comes up with making up words or using French words in the middle of a sentence, but it bridges the gap. It bridges the gap and it reconciles the difference. So this is one of the functional ways of being an expat overseas. And for anyone who's moving or thinking of going or is overseas now and has differences in the language, I would just recommend to play with it, because I think sometimes we don't play enough. Can you speak to where playfulness lands in this list? Because the list seems a little bit serious.
Yeah, absolutely. It's playful in a number of ways. I think the reconciliation step is very much the playfulness. Now, the recognition can sometimes feel like iron sharpening iron. I hear that phrase sometimes, and I think that sounds painful. I think if I was the iron or the iron, it's rough edges going up against each other. Recognition of the differences, calling them out and naming them is risky. It is painful if we don't have in mind a process to make sense of them. Respecting can be fun. I think having a little laugh at our own ignorance, that's one thing, the little self-deprecating laugh. I have that American, that English. I just spent 5 months in London, living in London last year. And I thought I knew about self-deprecation. And so it's just putting myself in the position of a learner and playing with the idea that, I don't know it all. And that's okay. And it's fun to discover these new things about my colleagues or friends or partner. And then the reconciliation step, absolutely. That's where play really comes in. For Trompenars, he gives actually in a couple of his books, he gives a number of different tools, which is to say, thinking tools, approaches for reconciling difference. One of my favorites is framing. Yes. How can I playfully reframe each side of a dilemma in the terms of the other? So, for instance, I might reframe directness in service of relationship by keeping us from error. If someone's very direct about saying everything that's wrong, I reframe that as keeping us from error and keeping us safe. Or I might say, and that's an indirectness kind of value. Or I might reframe indirectness as making space and providing the context for directness when it's needed. And now, does that sound like playful, like getting on the floor with your grandkids and doing some Lego? All right, so maybe that's not the most playful thing. But the playful, I guess the real play of it comes in practicing it. And having a laugh at ourselves as we try it, as we try new things. Doreen, I love that you just mentioned Franglish. I mean, I've never been to Singapore, but I can't wait to go and hear Singlish spoken in its homeland.
It's Chinglish. It's Chinglish because it's Chinese too. It's Singaporean.
Yeah, that's right.
Chinese and English. Yeah.
Yeah, and Sharon, I imagine you've heard or maybe even spoken some Spanglish.
Oh yes. We say we speak Tex-Mex. And so when I say that to the local Mexican people, they just laugh. They think that's great because I am laughing at myself but I'm at least trying. You try.
Yeah. And the thing that I love about this, again, I guess I get a little serious about it. We often do this in work situations where there's stakes and relational situations where there's real stakes. But a lot of the playfulness, I think, comes in when we recognize that we have to create something new. It's Doreen, you kind of mentioned this. We're creating a new thing. It's not an off-the-shelf, off-the-rack solution. We probably don't already know the answer. That's why it's been challenging. That's why we haven't addressed it before in a team or a relationship. But we can play with it and we can change it. We're adults. We are allowed to, even kids can do this. Kids actually maybe are our best teachers. Watching them organically organize themselves on the playground is a great example of this. Hey, we'll iterate. We'll try a new thing.
Yeah. I watched this on the pickleball court. And we have rules. One day you're signed up to play in a certain court with these people, but there's a court alongside with certain people, and sometimes people are missing. And it's fascinating to step back and watch the self-organizing human principles of self-organization at work, because it's like and as an interculturalist, I just am fascinated by the way we kind of do this subconsciously, just off the cuff, because everybody wants to play. But it's a fact of life. And I think sometimes we're a little bit like bumper cars on the stage of life, especially nowadays when there just seems to be so much dissonance. And so I'm always looking for ways that we can watch the bumper cars and figure out what is the principle that's organizing this right now, and before I try to fit in.
Yeah, and I think the good news about bumper cars is that the whole fun of bumper cars is aiming it directly at your friend and putting your foot all the way in the accelerator. And the good news is, even though it doesn't feel like this sometimes, people don't come to work to do that. Typically,
Right.
People don't get into relationships to do that. People don't join an organization or hit the pickleball court to do that.
No.
We want to organize it. My example there is getting involved in pickup soccer games or football games in different parts of the world. It kind of always operates
Like
pretty
that.
similarly.
Yes.
Yeah. It's self-organized. It'd be a little different here or there, but yeah, humans I think want to work together. Like I said, we want to love. We want the best for one another and for ourselves. So
yeah, I do think that is a common human impulsion. So we're talking about recognizing the differences, respecting the differences. So noticing them, respecting them, paying attention to them, reconciling the differences. That's where we get creative and we can be experimental. And then realizing that there's an iterative and a reiterative process of the creativity in the midst of these differences, right? That's what I heard you say. Sharon, would you like to go ahead and ask the next question?
Let's see. Every team can grow in effectiveness, efficiency by leveraging cultural empathy. What do you mean by that?
There's a lot of big words.
It is.
Yeah. And I use I also love alliteration and assonance, and so and the rule of three, so constantly throwing things out there like the 3 L's or the 4 R's. So efficiency and effectiveness. Here's what I mean. A lot of people get hung up on inclusion talk. They're like, well, why do we have to do inclusion? We're here to run a business. We're here to achieve a mission. Even a nonprofit or a school system might say, hey, we're here to impact the community or educate children. We're not here for inclusion. We're not here for all this other stuff. What's the business case for this? Now, I want to say the business case. Be human and relate to other humans, and that's enough to want to connect across cultural differences and see each other for all of our uniqueness. You can celebrate that without a business case, but there is a business case. I don't have the studies right to hand, so I hesitate to cite them specifically, but just there's been research done. Erin Meyer quotes this in her work. The Intercultural Development Inventory folks, Dr. Hammer quotes this in his work, that multicultural teams, well managed, that are in alignment and taking advantage of the diversity on their teams, can actually outperform monocultural teams and drastically outperform badly managed, chaotic multicultural teams that are now polarizing their bumper cars instead of going in the same direction, pulling in the same direction. So the effectiveness of a team increases by digging into our cultural empathy,
and therefore that reduces stress in the workplace. If we're talking about, professionalism, when you're all pulling, and I've seen the statistics, and they're quite dramatic. I mean, they're not just by a little bit. We're not talking 2% or 3%. We're talking, a lot more than that. And so I think that this is the good news of the ICI and all the other systems that we have at our fingertips nowadays, is because other people are starting to do correlative studies that help us think through how to be better and just how to
Yeah.
be better naturally at work, right?
Yeah. How to be better naturally at work, and there's these little nudges.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing too, when I sent you that sentence, Sharon, I didn't emphasize it, italicize it, bold it, but what I might have done is really bolded the word can. I think that a lot of us
Possible.
are self-disqualifying from this kind of thing. We say, I don't have a passport, so I don't do culture, or I have a passport, but there's not a lot of stamps in it. I live in a certain kind of place, or I'm around certain kind of. It's like, no, actually, I'm not an extrovert like you, Nick, and I say that's okay. That's okay. You can learn. Just kidding. Um, but B, there's introverted ways to do this. There's ways to do this wherever you are. Every team can do this because differences will show up. In Trompenar's or Aaron Meyer's idea, how we make decisions. What does a decision mean? How do we edit decisions and refocus? How do we build rapport and trust? How do we have hard conversations or good conversations, praise and feedback of all kinds? Hey, there's going to be differences. Oh, wow. If I'm going to be, as one person put it, a valued member of a winning team on an inspiring mission, if that's the key to employee engagement, everyone is a valued member. Okay. How do I feel valued? I want to know on my team, how does everyone feel valued? So they can feel like a valued member. What is a winning team? Is it a bunch of
Right.
individuals, or is this a cohesive unit?
Yeah.
Where do you see it? Hey, let's get there. I can motivate people better. I can be motivated better. People will get more work out of me if they really emphasize team and the human element. I have
Yes.
friends, you can't talk to them about team. Tell them about how they're an all-star. Tell them about how they're an MVP. Tell them about how they're the Heisman Trophy winner. And these are all very American
Yes.
references to different sports, but tell me how I'm the most outstanding, wonderful thing that ever walked the earth. And they will run through walls for you
Yes.
uh, as an individual. And so that's how they win. So that there's a strong business case on a macro statistical level, even down into the micro level of
Yeah.
how we actually operate our teams and our relationships.
This is really great, Nick. So you said a valuable member of a winning team. And can you say the inspiring part again, please?
Yeah. Everyone wants to feel like a valued member of a winning team on an inspiring mission.
Yes.
Now, I can't think of many things that are more cultural than what's an inspiring mission. Are we helping individuals grow or communities? What is inspiring to you? What is a mission and how do we go about it? Again, getting clarity on that is one thing we do with teams, asking what actually do you value? And how will we align our behaviors in the team and out with the world with those values? Yep.
And that's what we seek to do here at Nomadic Diaries. We seek to present professional, inspiring individuals who have intercultural experiences or talents or skills, and to showcase those talents and skills in order that the listeners can learn or be inspired to do something a little bit differently, right?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we're going to have to put this on. And do we have to give you credit for this? That you're going to be valued members of a winning team on an inspiring mission.
What actually I can do is after we hang up, I'll email you the actual reference. They say originality is forgetting your sources. And since I can't remember who said that, you can credit me with that one. That one I made up.
That's great. That's great.
I've got a colleague who calls it R&D. Just rip off and duplicate.
Yes.
I'll send you a source for that later.
Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes and everybody can rip it off and share it.
Well, that's terrific. I guess in wrapping up this really great conversation, because there's so much in here. It's kind of like I want to go back and read my notes and reiterate it, but this will all be in the show notes, and there will be links, lots of links to Nick, so our listeners, you can find him. But tell me, we've talked about Aaron Meyer, we've talked about Franz Trompenauers, we've talked about Mary Frances Winters. Who else, if somebody wants to learn about intercultural, just the whole entire subject, who else do you really inspires you, number one, and where would you direct our listeners to go find out more? And we can also put this in the show notes.
Yeah, thank you. Love shouting out the mentors, whether they know they're mentors of mine or not. I have a lot of secret mentors. I've just been getting mentored through books and podcasts and that sort of thing. Here's what I would say. Too many to name. Oh, that's such a challenging question. Hardest question so far.
Well, give me two or three. Just two is great.
2 or 3. Here's what I would say. I would say Aaron Meyer is
Yes.
just doing great work with us.
Yes.
Accessible. It's got some abstract concepts. It's definitely coming from a Western,
Yeah.
US, European point of view, just noting that. But I think skillfully done. Her references are solid where she's you could create a great interculturalist curriculum just out of her footnotes. That's one place I would start. My source for Trompinars was actually Janet Bennett.
Oh, yes.
Janet Bennett was involved with the early work with the intercultural development inventory, the intercultural development continuum, this idea that how we approach cultural difference actually grows because of our experiences with difference, how that hits us emotionally, psychologically, and how we process that and how we grow. They described that. Dr. Mitch Hammer developed a way to assess that along with others. But Janet Bennett was right there in all of that work.
I think you're the third person or the second person. What do you think, Sharon? Her name has come up on this podcast before. And so when we are starting,
I'm so delighted.
So when we're starting to see a pattern, I think it's really interesting and important to point those patterns out to people. And I love what you said about it hitting you differently, because I've been considering creating a talk about the difference between being a third chapter expat as opposed to being a 20-something-year-old expat living overseas. And all of the iterations that I feel I have lived through, and now how culture and intercultural dissonance lands differently. It's like I can take a deep breath. I'm much more calm. I'm much more paced in my processing. And there's lots of differences. And I need to go back and read Janet Bennett, apparently.
We all do. Janet got the idea from Stanford's idea of challenge and support in student development. But in her session at the Summer Institute for Intercultural Communication, she shared this idea of risk factors or challenge factors when working abroad or working in multicultural environments versus support factors. And just to that point, Doreen, you're exactly right. You have different support needs.
Yes.
You have different challenges than the 20-something study abroad or early career international assignment person. So that's a really great insight. And Janet speaks directly to it. Talking about the 4 R's, she's the one that turned me on to that. And then I went to see where Trompinars talked about it. A little bonus fact, that 4R approach works for everything. Trompinars talks culture, but she says any way that you can map interpersonal difference, she calls it an interpersonal positioning system, IPS. She says any way that you can map a difference, learning style, personality, communication style, all these things, using this procedure and this method, either individually or especially collaboratively, will help bridge those gaps. Go read some Janet Bennett.
Well, thank you. And I, it's like having a GPS, because especially for some of our listeners who are considering launching themselves overseas, and some of our listeners are perhaps moving back after living overseas for many years and dealing with reverse culture shock. So I would just like to support you in going to find, first of all, Nick, and then Janet Bennett. In that order.
Oh, not at all. Read Janet Bennett first, and then come talk with me on Twitter at Hey Nick Dunn, or on LinkedIn You can find me with my name, Nicholas Dunn or Nick Dunn. Uplift Culture Consulting. Janet, unfortunately, has passed on
Right.
in the last few years, but her work lives on very much so, and so many interculturalists, and in some great writing as well.
Yeah, we all did really enjoyed that institute. And sadly, when she passed, the institute changed. It went its separate ways. And so it's wonderful to have you here. And thank you so much for your brilliance, your patience, and your clear-eyed version of interculturalism, making it accessible for those of us that want to live alongside or between cultures.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a delight to listen and learn with you all.
Continue your great work. Thank you, Nick.
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks, Dorian.